In the quiet town of Pine Hill, Emily Daniels, a humble trainee nurse, steps into danger one snowy night to protect an elderly stranger from three assailants. Her brave act leaves her unconscious, bleeding on the pavement. Rushed to her own hospital, Emily's selfless courage ripples through her community, uniting colleagues in a vigil. As she fights for life, the stranger, revealed as Colonel Henry Keene, a decorated Marine, makes a call that reaches the White House. What secrets does Keene hold, and how will Emily's quiet life transform when the nation's highest office takes notice? The truth awaits. Inspired by Emily's story of courage and kindness, share your own moments of compassion in the comments. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate real American values, community, bravery, and heart. Like, comment, and join us to honor the quiet heroes who make a difference every day. In the quiet frost-kissed town of Pine Hill, nestled in the rolling foothills of upstate New York, Emily Daniels lived a life that hummed with unassuming purpose. At 26, she was a trainee nurse at Pine Hill Regional Medical Center, a modest hospital with chipped tiles and faded posters that served the overlooked, retirees, veterans, and families scraping by on dreams and grit. Emily's days were a blur of long shifts, her hands steady as she checked vitals or offered a warm smile to patients who rarely saw visitors. She lived paycheck to paycheck in a small apartment above a shuttered laundromat, where the radiator groaned like an old friend struggling through the night. Her furniture was mismatched, her coat patched at the elbows, yet her heart was woven with the quiet strength of her mother, Marie, a hospice nurse who taught her to show up for others, not for applause, but because it was right. That lesson was Emily's compass, guiding her through exhaustion and uncertainty, even as she wondered if her tireless efforts would ever lift her from the edge of financial strain. Each day, Emily poured herself into the small, unnoticed acts that made her indispensable. She remembered the names of patients others forgot: the grizzled war veteran with no family, the elderly woman who feared the dark. After hours, she'd sit by their bedsides, her presence a soft anchor in their loneliness. She shared coffee with weary janitors during endless night shifts and once gave her own boots to a coworker caught in the rain. No one asked her to do these things. She simply did them, her kindness a steady rhythm in a world that often felt chaotic. At the hospital, she was the glue in the understaffed wards, her calm a lifeline during late-night emergencies. Yet beneath her quiet resilience, Emily carried a private weariness. The constant scramble for rent, the sting of watching others climb the ladder while she remained a trainee, it gnawed at her. Still, she never let it dim her resolve. Her belief in small, daily kindnesses wasn't a performance. It was her truth. One bitter January night, everything changed. Emily's shift had stretched past midnight, as it often did, leaving her drained but steady as she left the hospital. Her stethoscope dangled around her neck, her canvas bag heavy on her shoulder. The winter air was sharp, slicing through her worn coat as snow dusted the sidewalks, crunching under her boots. Pine Hill was silent at this hour, the streets empty save for the faint hum of a vending machine and the flicker of aging streetlights casting long, wavering shadows. Emily didn't mind the walk home. It was her moment to breathe, to let the weight of the hospital slip away. She'd never owned a car, couldn't afford one, and the solitude of the quiet streets felt like a small gift, a chance to unravel the day's knots. As she passed the old community church, its steeple shrouded in snow, a sound pierced the stillness. Low, harsh voices, thick with menace. At first, she thought it was just a late-night argument, but as she rounded the corner, her breath caught. Under a flickering street lamp stood three men, their figures hunched and predatory, circling an elderly stranger. The older man's coat was thin, his hands trembling as he clutched a crumpled paper bag. One of the men shoved him hard, sending him stumbling against the icy brick wall. Another grabbed his sleeve, his voice a snarl that cut through the cold. Emily's heart pounded, a mix of fear and instinct surging through her. She could have turned away, kept walking, stayed safe, but that wasn't who she was. Her legs moved before her mind caught up, carrying her toward the scene. "Hey," she called, her voice sharper than she felt, trembling with adrenaline, but firm. The men turned, their eyes narrowing, but Emily didn't falter. She stepped between them and the elderly man, her small frame a fragile shield. Her mind raced, Fear clawed at her, whispering that she was outmatched, that this was reckless. But her mother's voice echoed louder. Show up because someone needs you. She didn't know the man behind her, didn't know his story, but she saw his fear, his frailty, and that was enough. The next moments were a blur. A fist swung, a shout rang out, and pain exploded across her skull. She hit the pavement, the cold biting into her skin as blood warmed her cheek. Darkness swallowed her, but not before she felt a fleeting pang of regret, not for stepping in, but for the patience she might not see tomorrow. When Emily woke, the world was sterile and bright, the familiar hum of Pine Hill Regional Medical Center surrounding her. But this time she wasn't the nurse, she was the patient. Her head throbbed, her body ached, and whispers floated around her, her name on strangers' lips. Among them was a man in a dark suit, his presence out of place in the modest hospital. His voice was low, his words careful, hinting at something bigger than Pine Hill, something that would unravel the quiet life she'd known. The elderly man she'd saved wasn't just a stranger, and what happened that night would thrust Emily from the shadows of a small town to the glare of the nation's highest office. She hadn't meant to be a hero, she'd only meant to show up. But sometimes that's where heroes are born. The night was bitter, the kind of cold that clawed through coats and settled deep in the bones. Emily Daniels felt it as she walked home, her sneakers crunching against the snow-dusted sidewalk of Pine Hill's quiet streets. Her shift at the hospital had been long, 12 hours of charts, beeping monitors, and the steady hum of lives hanging in the balance. She was tired, her body heavy, but her mind was sharp, always scanning, always noticing. That's why she stopped when she heard it. A voice, low and menacing, tangled with a whimper she couldn't quite decipher. Her breath hitched, caught somewhere between her lungs and throat, as her body screamed at her to keep moving. Cross the street, look away, pretend it's nothing. But Emily had never been wired that way. Not when a patient cried out in pain, not when a stranger needed help, and certainly not now. She turned toward the sound, her heart thudding against her ribs. In the dim glow of a street lamp, she saw them. 3 men looming over an older gentleman, his coat tattered, his shoulders hunched as if trying to shrink away from the world. The men's laughter was cruel, their movements predatory. Emily's stomach twisted, a mix of fear and fury rising in her chest. She didn't think. She acted. Hey! Her voice cut through the night, sharper than she'd ever heard it, startling even herself. Leave him alone! The men froze, their heads swiveling toward her. The tallest one, his face half-shadowed under a dark knit cap, stepped forward. A patchy beard framed his smirk, the kind that said he owned this street, this moment. And no one, not her, not anyone, could tell him otherwise. His eyes raked over her, taking in her scrubs, her tired posture, and he sneered. Keep walking, nurse lady, he slurred, his voice thick with menace and liquor. This ain't your business. Emily's pulse roared in her ears, so loud it drowned out the wind. Her hands trembled, but not enough to stop her. She took a step closer, her chin lifting, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He hasn't done anything to you. Let him go. She didn't know where the words came from, only that they felt right, necessary, like a vow she'd made long ago to never stand by while someone suffered. The man closest to the older gentleman laughed, a low, guttural sound that made her skin crawl. What are you gonna do, huh? Patch us up after. Another chuckle, meaner this time, rippled through the group. One of them stepped toward her, his boots heavy on the pavement. Then, without warning, a hand shot out, shoving her hard. Emily's feet slipped on the icy curb, her body twisting as she tried to catch herself. Her shoulder slammed into the edge of a dumpster, the metal biting into her flesh. The world tilted, and her head hit the pavement with a sickening crack. Pain exploded behind her eyes, white-hot and all-consuming. She tasted blood, sharp and metallic, as her vision blurred. The street lamp above flared, sending halos dancing across her sight. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, her body pinned to the cold ground as snowflakes swirled above her. The sounds around her warped, footsteps retreating, a distant shout, the harsh panting of someone running. Then nothing. The men were gone. The old man, too. Only the cold remained, seeping through her scrubs, wrapping around her like a shroud. Emily might have slipped away entirely, her consciousness fading into the snow, if not for the man across the street. Thomas Reed had just locked up his bookstore, his hands full of receipts and keys, his mind already drifting to the warmth of his apartment. The commotion had caught his ear, shouts, laughter, nothing unusual for Pine Hill's rougher nights. He'd almost ignored it, chalking it up to drunks blowing off steam. But then he saw her, a figure crumpled on the ground, motionless under the street lamp's glow. His heart lurched, and he was running before he could think, his boots slipping on the ice. Miss, can you hear me?" Thomas knelt beside her, his breath clouding in the frigid air. Her face was pale, blood trickling from her temple, her eyes fluttering weakly. She blinked once, a faint sign of life, then her gaze rolled back, her body going limp. Panic surged through him, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his phone. 911 now, he barked into the receiver, his voice cracking. "She's bleeding. Head wound. Unconscious. Please just get here fast." He cradled her head gently, lifting it off the concrete, his fingers slick with her blood. He yanked off his jacket and draped it over her, a feeble shield against the wind that howled through the empty street. 2 minutes later, sirens wailed, their red and blue lights painting the snowbanks in frantic brushstrokes. The ambulance screeched to a halt, and a paramedic team from Pine Hill Regional spilled out. One of them froze mid-step, his eyes locking onto the figure on the ground. "It's Emily," he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. They all knew her, Emily Daniels, the nurse who always had a chart in her hand, who moved through the hospital like a quiet storm of compassion, always ready to help. Tonight, though, she was the one being lifted onto the stretcher, her body still, her breath a fragile thread. "She's one of ours," another EMT said, his voice soft, almost sacred. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and Emily disappeared inside, unconscious, blood trailing from her temple, her breath shallow. No one knew yet that the man she'd tried to protect had once worn the uniform of a United States Marine, or that a phone call had just been made, one that would ripple through Pine Hill and beyond, setting events in motion that no one could predict. Inside the ER, the ambulance bay erupted with urgency. The doors hissed open, and a paramedic's voice rang out, clipped and sharp. "Head trauma, female, late 20s, GCS dropping." The stretcher rolled into view, and the night shift staff froze, their breath catching as they recognized her. "Wait, is that?" A nurse's pen clattered to the desk, her hands flying to her mouth. The whisper spread like a current. "That's Emily." Emily Daniels wasn't just another name on the trauma board. She was family. For years, she'd walked these halls, her presence a quiet force. She'd brought coffee to residents bleary-eyed from endless shifts, stayed late to hold the hands of patients with no one else to visit, and once helped the custodial crew mop up a spill without a second thought. No kindness was too small, no task beneath her. Now she lay under the blinding trauma lights, her face slack, her pulse faint, blood seeping from the wound at her temple. Dr. Khalid Patel, the attending trauma surgeon, felt his heart clench as he barked orders. "Get neuro on standby, vitals every minute." He'd seen 1,000 trauma cases, but never one that made his hands tremble. The room snapped into motion. Nurses prepped IVs, another sliced through her bloodied scrubs, a respiratory therapist checked her airway. Monitors screamed, their stats flashing a dire warning of how close she was to slipping away. Outside the trauma room, word spread, and the hospital staff began to gather. Rachel, the night nurse who'd once split a break room sandwich with Emily, stood frozen, her eyes glassy. Leo, the janitor, leaned against the wall, his mind replaying the cough drops she'd brought him during a brutal flu season. Maria, the cafeteria manager, arrived next, her heart heavy as she thought of how her daughter Emily had tutored her daughter between shifts, never asking for thanks. They didn't need to be called, they just came, drawn by a shared ache, a fear that the woman who'd always been their light might not wake up this time. In the narrow, dimly lit hallway outside Trauma 1, a quiet gathering formed, not out of duty but from a deep, unspoken love. It wasn't a loud scene, no histrionics or grand gestures, just a steady presence. These were people Emily had once noticed when the world had turned its back on them, people she'd lifted with small, deliberate acts of kindness. They stood there now, holding space for her, their collective breath a silent prayer for the woman who'd given them so much. Inside the trauma bay, the air hummed with the relentless rhythm of survival. Nurses moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, each motion purposeful, each second a battle against time. The suction line hissed as it cleared blood from Emily's scalp, matted and dark with injury. Saline dripped steadily into her veins, a lifeline tethering her to the world. Her name echoed through the room, not cold or detached, but warm, urgent, like a plea woven into every syllable. Emily, stay with us. You're not done yet. You've carried us all. Let us carry you now. Amid the controlled chaos of medical orders and monitors, memories surfaced, each one a testament to the woman lying still on the gurney. One nurse, her hand steady as she adjusted an IV, recalled the night Emily took her shift without hesitation when her son was in surgery. No questions, no expectations, just Emily's quiet nod and a promise to handle it. An orderly, wiping sweat from his brow, thought of the time Emily pressed her last $5 bill into his hand when he couldn't afford a meal. Her smile soft but insistent. Another voice, barely a whisper, spoke of the baby blanket Emily had hand-stitched for a patient with no family, each stitch a labor of love for a stranger. Her kindness was a thread, delicate yet unbreakable, weaving through the lives of everyone in that hospital, binding them together. Now they stood as a net, desperate to catch her before she slipped beyond their reach. At the far end of the hallway, a solitary figure sat in silence, his presence both unassuming and heavy with meaning. He wore a coat too thin for the biting cold outside, its frayed edges a stark contrast to the rigid discipline in his posture. His hands, folded tightly in his lap, betrayed a quiet strength, though his eyes carried a weight no one dared question. Grief and reverence mingled in his gaze, and the staff stepped lightly around him, sensing a story too profound to disturb. He didn't speak, didn't move, but he stayed, rooted to that spot, as if his presence alone could anchor Emily to life. No one knew his name, only that he was the man Emily had shielded, the one she'd stepped in front of when danger loomed. In his stillness, there was a debt, a gratitude so deep it seemed to radiate from him, a man who'd seen the horrors of war, but never expected salvation from a young woman in scrubs. His silence told a story of a life reshaped by her courage, a moment that had altered the course of his existence. Inside the trauma bay, the team worked without pause, their focus unyielding despite the ache in their hearts. A CT scan revealed the brutal truth, a skull fracture and a slow, insidious subdural bleed. The call went out to prep Emily for neurosurgery, a race against the creeping shadow in her brain. Rachel, a nurse who'd worked alongside Emily for years, leaned close as they prepared to wheel her away. She took Emily's hand, cold and limp, but still pulsing with faint warmth, a fragile reminder of the life within. "You're not going anywhere, Emily," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling with conviction. "Not on our watch." The words were a vow, a promise from every soul in that room who'd been touched by Emily's quiet strength. As the doors swung open, carrying Emily into the next chapter of her fight, it wasn't just her battle anymore. It belonged to everyone she'd lifted, everyone she'd saved in her unassuming way. In the ICU waiting room, the man from the hallway sat rigidly, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. His worn coat, its sleeves threadbare, and his scuffed boots spoke of a life hard-lived, but there was an unmistakable discipline in him. It wasn't just the way he held himself, spine straight despite the exhaustion pulling at his limbs. It was the way he listened, the way he waited, as if every sound from the ICU carried the weight of his world. No one knew his name, only that he'd been there when Emily Daniels fell, when she'd stepped into harm's way to protect him, when the neurosurgeon emerged with an update, stable for now, but delicate. The man closed his eyes briefly as if whispering a prayer to someone long gone. Then with a slow, deliberate motion, he stood and stepped outside, his movements measured, purposeful. No one stopped him. No one saw what he did next. In the cold, sterile light of the hospital's entrance, he pulled a cracked flip phone from his pocket, an relic in a world of sleek smartphones. His fingers, steady despite the chill, dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The line rang twice before a voice answered, clipped and alert. Operations Command, who's calling? The man's voice was steady, unyielding. This is Colonel Henry Keene. Authorization Bravo Zulu Echo 3. I need to speak to Director Pierce. Tell him it's about an incident involving a civilian nurse. And me. The line went silent for a moment. Then a new voice came through. Older, slower, but sharp as a blade. Colonel Keene, it's been a while. Keene's response was immediate, his tone carrying the weight of a man who rarely asked for anything. I need a favor. The voice on the other end paused. You're not one to ask. I know, Keene replied, but this one matters. She's in critical condition because she stepped in when no one else did, saved me from a beating. Probably worse. Another pause, then the question. What's her name? Emily Daniels. Within 15 minutes, a secured message left Fort Belvoir. 10 minutes later, a contact at the West Wing was briefed. By dawn, an unmarked black SUV was en route to Pine Hill Regional Medical Center, its tires crunching softly over the salt-strewn pavement. Back in the waiting room, Keene returned to his seat, this time leaning slightly forward, elbows resting on his knees. His breathing was tight, his eyes distant, as if seeing something beyond the sterile walls. Henry Keene was no ordinary man. He was a decorated Marine colonel, a leader who'd commanded soldiers in the brutal heat of Kandahar, authored field protocols for embassy security teams, and for 6 years stood as part of the elite White House security attaché guarding the President of the United States. He'd shaken hands with world leaders, delivered classified briefings in bunkers hidden from the public's knowledge. Now he was a man the world had overlooked, his past buried beneath a worn coat and a life of quiet struggle. Yet Emily Daniels had seen him, had risked her life for him without knowing his story, without caring who he'd been. Her courage, instinctive, selfless, had shaken him in a way no battlefield ever had. The military had taught him strategy, silence, loyalty, but Emily had shown him something rarer, the raw, uncalculating bravery of a single act. As the snow ceased falling, the black SUV rolled into the hospital parking lot, silent except for the faint crunch of salt beneath its tires. No sirens, no fanfare, just purpose. Inside the hospital, the vigil continued, a quiet testament to a woman who'd woven herself into the lives of so many. For Keene, for the nurses, for the orderly, for every soul waiting in that hallway, Emily's fight was their fight now, a shared battle to hold on to the light she'd given them all. The sleek black vehicle rolled to a stop, its government plates gleaming faintly under the streetlights, its tinted windows swallowing the light like a void. No sirens, no flashing lights, just a quiet, imposing presence that seemed to command the world around it to hush. A man emerged from the car, his dark gray suit crisp despite the late hour, his posture radiating purpose. He wasn't tall, but his stride carried the weight of someone who moved through life with precision, every step deliberate, every moment accounted for. His polished shoes clicked softly against the pavement, and under his arm he clutched a weathered leather folder, sealed in a navy envelope, adorned with a gold-embossed crest that hinted at authority far beyond this small town. Without pausing, without glancing at a map or asking for directions, he crossed the threshold of Pine Hill Regional Medical Center, breezing past the reception desk as if the building itself had been expecting him. The security guard's eyes flickered toward him, but didn't linger. The nurses at their stations exchanged quick glances, but said nothing. It was as if an unspoken understanding rippled through the air. This was not a man to be questioned, not a man to be delayed. Inside the ICU, the air was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the soft rhythmic beeping of machines. Dr. Khaled, still clad in his rumpled scrubs, pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside, his face a mask of quiet exhaustion. He'd been on his feet for hours, navigating the delicate balance between hope and heartbreak that defined his work. Emily Daniels lay in the hospital bed, propped slightly upright, her skin pale as moonlight, her chest rising and falling with shallow, careful breaths. Her eyes, though heavy with fatigue, fluttered open, adjusting to the dim glow of the room. Each blink seemed to pull her further from the fog of unconsciousness, her mind grasping for clarity amidst the haze of pain and medication. At her side sat Rachel, her closest friend, her hand resting gently on Emily's forearm, a tether to the world of the living. Rachel's face was etched with worry, but her voice was soft, steady, a lifeline. "You're okay," she whispered, her words carrying the weight of a prayer. "You're back." Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. Her throat was dry, her voice a stranger to her own body. She blinked again, her gaze darting around the room, taking in the blinking monitors, the sterile walls, the faint hum of life-sustaining machinery. Confusion clouded her eyes. What had happened? Why was she here? The memories were fragments, sharp and disjointed, refusing to form a coherent picture. Then a new figure appeared in the doorway, his presence shifting the room's atmosphere like a storm rolling in. Colonel Henry Keene stepped forward, his movements slow but deliberate, his military bearing unmistakable, even in the absence of his tattered coat. Someone had given him a clean, pressed shirt, military style, and he wore it with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through decades of service. His hands were clasped behind his back, his face solemn, etched with lines that told stories of loss and duty. He approached Emily's bedside, stopping a respectful distance away, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You don't know me," he said, his voice low, steady, almost reverent. "Not really, but I know you." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning Emily couldn't yet grasp. She tried to speak, to ask what he meant, but her throat betrayed her, and she could only blink, her confusion deepening. Keene's gaze softened, and he continued, his voice carrying the weight of years of regret. "I failed to protect people once, in a place where protection was my only job. That failure has haunted me, followed me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. But you—" He paused, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for the courage he'd lost long ago. "That night, you didn't hesitate. You stepped in. You saved me. A man you didn't know, a man who, to anyone else, might not have looked worth saving." Emily's lips parted again, but still no sound came. Her mind churned, piecing together fragments of memory, a dark street, a moment of instinct, a choice made without thought. Keene's small, almost imperceptible smile broke through the solemnity of his expression, a flicker of warmth in the storm of his past. "You reminded me what honor looks like," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words aloud might make them too real, too fragile. Behind him, the man in the suit, Agent Nathan Pierce, entered the room with the same silent authority he'd carried through the hospital's halls. In his hands was the leather folder, its navy envelope gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He handed it to the attending nurse, who passed it to Rachel with a reverence that suggested she, too, sensed the gravity of the moment. Rachel's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the contents before she gently placed it in Emily's hands. The paper was heavy, official, the kind of document that carried the weight of history. At the top, in crisp black ink, was her name, Emily Grace Daniels. Not Miss, not trainee, just her name, unadorned, as if it alone was enough to command respect. Below it, an official request from the President of the United States, and beneath that, a single sentence that stole the air from her lungs. "The nation has not forgotten you." Emily stared at the letter, her fingers brushing the raised seal at the top, the emblem of the President's office. It felt unreal, like something from a dream she wasn't supposed to have. Her life had been one of small horizons, paycheck to paycheck, patched up shoes, an apartment above a laundromat that rattled with the hum of machines. This paper, this moment, felt like it belonged to someone else. Her silence wasn't from pain, though her body ached with every breath. It was disbelief, a quiet refusal to accept that the world could see her this way. Rachel sat beside her, holding a glass of water Emily had forgotten to drink, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of emotions swirling through the room. Colonel Keene stood by the window, his arms crossed behind him, his posture rigid as if he were standing at attention, guarding this moment from the outside world. Agent Pierce watched with the calm, focused gaze of someone who had seen history unfold in quiet hospital rooms, someone who understood the power of a single act to ripple outward. "Is this real?" Emily's voice was a whisper, barely audible, but it carried the weight of her disbelief, her hope, her fear. Pierce gave a single, measured nod, his expression unreadable but kind. The president read the full report this morning, he said. He asked that this be delivered by hand. Emily's eyes dropped back to the letter, rereading the words for the third time, as if repetition might make them feel less like a dream. You have been a light in dark places, not just to one man, but to everyone you've served. In recognition of your courage and compassion, I am formally inviting you to accept the position of honorary head nurse of the White House Medical Wing. The words were followed by details: full benefits, relocation support, a permanent role serving those who serve the nation. Attached was another letter, this one handwritten, its ink slightly smudged as if written in haste or emotion. Dear Ms. Daniels, it began. I don't know where people like you find the strength to stand up when it's easiest to walk away. But because you did, you reminded all of us what character truly means. We need more of that in Washington. We need more of you. Welcome home. It was signed simply, the president. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, blurring the words on the page. Rachel leaned closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from Emily's forehead, her touch gentle but grounding. You did this, Em, she whispered, her voice thick with pride, just by being who you are. Emily's chest tightened, not with pain, but with the overwhelming weight of what this meant. She'd never asked for recognition, never expected it. Her life had been one of quiet survival, of doing what needed to be done because no one else would. And now the world had noticed. There's more, Agent Pierce said, his voice soft but deliberate. He reached into his coat and produced a small envelope, opening it to reveal a set of keys, plain, unmarked, attached to a silver tag engraved with a house number. A furnished townhouse in Arlington, mortgage-free, he said, and a vehicle, yours outright. You'll also receive lifetime VA medical benefits under special civilian provisions. Emily stared at the keys, her fingers trembling as she reached for them. A home, a car, a future. These were things she'd never dared to dream of, things that had always felt out of reach for someone who walked to work in shoes held together by hope and duct tape. Her life had been defined by scarcity, by the constant calculus of survival. And now this, a giddy, a home, a purpose. Not because she'd sought it, but because she'd acted, because she'd chosen to step into the dark when others might have turned away. The faded stairs creaked beneath Emily's feet as she climbed them one last time, her heart heavy with the weight of leaving. Her apartment above the old laundromat on Pine Hills Main Street had been her refuge, its peeling wallpaper and rattling windows a testament to the life she'd built from nothing. She paused at the bottom, her hand resting on the worn doorknob, her mind flooded with memories of late nights studying for her nursing exams, of Rachel's laughter filling the tiny space, of the dreams she'd tucked away because they felt too big for a town this small. She didn't know what lay ahead in Arlington, in the White House, in a life so far removed from everything she'd known. But as she turned the key in the lock one final time, she felt something new stirring inside her, a quiet, steady courage, the kind that had brought her to this moment, the kind that would carry her forward. The faint aroma of brewed tea mingled with the earthy scent of aged wood, a fragrance that whispered of a life carved out through quiet perseverance. Emily Daniels lingered at the threshold of her small apartment, her fingers grazing the chipped brass doorknob, its surface worn smooth by years of use. Her eyes caught the familiar scratches etched into the doorframe, remnants of countless moments when her keys had fumbled, missing the lock in her rush to get inside after long shifts. Those marks told a story of exhaustion, of late nights, of a life pieced together with care. Stepping inside, she let the door close softly behind her, the gentle click echoing in the stillness. The room unfolded before her, unchanged, as if time had paused in her absence. There was the thrift store armchair, its faded upholstery bathed in the soft glow of the window, where she'd spent countless evenings curled up with a book. The tiny kettle on the stove, its shrill whistle always louder than it needed to be, stood ready to sing. By the sink, mismatched mugs sat drying on a worn dish towel, each one a quiet testament to hurried mornings and late-night teas. Her gaze swept the modest space, every corner brimming with memories, each item a fragment of the life she'd built from scratch. In her bag, nestled beside her keys, was a letter from the President of the United States, its weight both literal and symbolic, alongside the keys to a new home, a future she could scarcely have dreamed of. But this place, this small apartment with its creaking floors and chipped paint, was the foundation of everything she'd become. It was where she'd stitched together a life from nothing, where she'd learned who she was. With a slow, deliberate breath, she began to pack. She folded her scrubs, their fabric softened by 3 years of relentless shifts, and tucked them into a weathered canvas duffel. Her stethoscope, its rubber tubing slightly frayed from use, went in next, a silent partner in countless moments of care. She didn't own much, a handful of well-loved books, a few photo frames capturing fleeting smiles, and a patchwork quilt her mother had sewn during those grueling months of chemotherapy, each stitch a labor of love and defiance. Packing was quick, but every motion felt heavy, as if each drawer she closed was a farewell to a piece of herself. She paused, her fingers lingering on the quilt, her mind flooded with memories of her mother's frail hands, her determined smile, and the way she'd whispered, "Keep going, Emily. Always keep going." Before leaving town, Emily made one final stop at the soup kitchen, a place that hummed with life and purpose. The air was thick with the clang of ladles against metal pots, the low murmur of voices weaving together, and the sharp hiss of steam rising from boiling water. As she stepped inside, the familiar chaos paused. Heads turned, and for a moment, the room fell silent. Then, like a wave breaking, the space erupted into motion. A small girl, no older than 7, let out a joyful cry and raced toward her, arms outstretched. "Emily!" the child squealed, her voice piercing the air. In an instant, Emily was enveloped. Volunteers, guests, children, all pressing close, their faces alight with warmth and gratitude. Mrs. Kellerman, the director, pulled her into a fierce embrace. So tight, Emily's bag nearly slipped from her shoulder. "We heard, sweet girl," Mrs. Kellerman said, her voice thick with pride. "We all did. You're going to do so much good out there." Emily's cheeks flushed, her heart caught in her throat. "I wasn't trying to do anything big," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Kellerman's eyes softened, a knowing smile spreading across her face. "That's exactly what makes it so big." They shared a meal, simple but warm, the kind of food that filled more than just the stomach. Laughter and stories swirled around the table, the clink of spoons against bowls, a comforting rhythm. An older man, his hands weathered but steady, passed her a crayon drawing his daughter had made, a bright, messy sketch of a smiling sun and a stick-figure woman in scrubs. "For you," he said gruffly, his eyes avoiding hers, but the gesture spoke volumes. Another woman, her face lined with years of hardship, approached with tearful eyes. She pressed a small silver cross into Emily's palm, its cool metal grounding her. "For protection," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "Like you gave us." Emily's fingers closed around the cross, her chest a tightening with a mix of gratitude and humility. As she walked home through the softly falling snow, her mind drifted, a quiet montage of moments playing out in her heart. She saw herself holding the hand of a terrified teenager in the ER, her steady grip a lifeline in the chaos. She remembered buying coffee for the night janitor, his tired eyes lighting up when someone finally noticed him. She recalled singing softly to a dementia patient, her voice coaxing the woman into a peaceful sleep, and reading stories to a child in the waiting room, distracting him while his mother fought for her life in surgery. She thought of the time she'd given her coat to a stranger shivering in the rain. The small act, unremarkable in the moment, but etched now in her memory. These were the moments no one had ever reported, never posted, never recorded, except in the hearts of those she'd touched. When she closed her apartment door for the last time, the space felt different. Not empty, but full, brimming with the life she'd lived there, the love she'd poured into it. She left a note on the table for the next tenant, its words simple but deliberate. "Leave it better than you found it. That's all that matters." With that, Emily Daniels stepped into the snow, her footsteps light but resolute, moving towards something new, but carrying the essence of who she'd always been. In Washington, the air felt sharper, imbued with a crisp dignity, as if even the wind moved with purpose. Emily stood at the edge of the White House garden, a tailored navy coat hugging her frame, her hair swept back into a modest knot. Her heart thudded beneath the fabric, not from fear but from awe, a quiet marvel at the path that had led her here. Rows of white folding chairs stretched across the manicured lawn, filled with cabinet officials, military leaders, and medical professionals in formal attire. Behind them, the garden bloomed vibrantly, tulips and roses framed by neatly trimmed hedges. But all eyes were drawn to the podium on the south lawn. A soft voice broke her reverie. "You ready?" Colonel Henry Keene asked, his tone warm but steady. She turned to him, noting how different he looked now, his sharp suit and squared shoulders a far cry from the man she'd seen that night, his eyes once clouded with fear. Now those same eyes held quiet pride, a reflection of shared history. "Not really," she admitted, a small smile tugging at her lips. He chuckled, a low, reassuring sound. "That's the right answer." A subtle hush rippled through the crowd as attention shifted. The president had arrived. He moved toward the podium with calm assurance, pausing to survey the gathering before his gaze settled on Emily, standing just off to the side. Cameras flashed silently, their lenses capturing a moment broadcast to millions, yet the air felt intimate, as if the entire nation had leaned in to listen. "Today," the president began, his voice steady but warm, "we do not honor a general, a senator, or a celebrity. We honor someone who reminds us of a truth this nation too often forgets. America's strength has never come from its titles, its towers, or its wealth." He paused, his tone softening, imbued with a quiet reverence. "Our strength comes from its people, from their quiet courage, from those who do what is right. Not because it's easy, but because someone had to." His eyes found Emily's, and the weight of his words settled over her like a mantle. She didn't know who she was protecting. She didn't ask for thanks. She stepped into danger for a man she didn't know, and in doing so she reminded us all what it means to be American. A moment of stillness hung in the air, profound and unbroken. Then the president gestured to Colonel Keene, who stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching softly on the gravel path. In his hands was a small, gleaming badge, silver and etched with the seal of the White House Medical Unit. He stood before Emily, his posture formal but his expression unguarded. "For your courage," he said, his voice clear and resonant, "and for the care you've given to strangers, to friends, to this country." His words carried a weight that reached beyond the ceremony, into the heart of everything Emily had ever done, every small act that had led her to this moment. As he pinned the badge to her coat, she felt the world blur around her, the weight of the honor mingling with the quiet pride of knowing she'd stayed true to herself. Emily Daniels stood frozen in the soft glow of the White House medical wing, her fingers grazing the badge newly pinned to her coat. The moment felt heavy, like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through her with a mix of awe and quiet resolve. The man before her, his hands steady with purpose, had spoken the words with a reverence that caught her off guard. "Head nurse, White House medical wing." The badge was cold against her fingertips, a small, polished emblem. But to her, it burned with meaning, a symbol of trust, of responsibility, of a nation's belief in her. Her throat tightened, not with tears, but with the weight of what this moment meant. The room around her came alive with applause, a polite but genuine wave of sound. Military officials nodded, their faces etched with respect. Cabinet members clapped, their hands steady with approval. The president himself offered a quiet salute, a gesture so understated yet so profound that it made her heart stutter. It was as if the world had paused to say, "We see you, Emily. We trust you." But Emily didn't raise her arms in triumph. She didn't let the tears that prickled her eyes fall. Instead, her hand found the badge, pressing it gently against her chest, grounding herself in the truth of who she was. Beneath the weight of the nation's gaze, she was still the woman who had folded blankets in the ER at midnight, her hands steady even as her body ached from long shifts. She was still the girl who had walked home alone through shadowed streets, her scrubs damp with sweat, giving everything she had without ever asking for more. That girl still lived inside her, unshaken by the grandeur of this moment. Now the country had noticed her, and it stood with her, its respect woven into the badge she wore. But Emily's heart didn't race with pride. It steadied with purpose. She wasn't here to chase glory. She was here to carry the weight of care, just as she always had. That morning, the White House medical wing hummed with a quiet energy, alive with purpose. The facility gleamed with state-of-the-art equipment, its pristine halls a far cry from the underfunded chaos of Pine Hill, where she'd spent years stretching meager resources to meet endless needs. Emily stood at the glass-paneled door, her reflection faint but steady as she adjusted the badge. Around her neck hung the same stethoscope she'd bought secondhand in her first year of nursing school, its worn leather strap a quiet reminder of her beginnings. Her shoes were new, polished to a soft shine, but her posture, calm, unassuming, remained unchanged. Her smile, gentle and warm, still carried the weight of someone who listened before speaking, who saw the person before the role. Those traits were her anchor, her truth, no matter where she stood. The medical unit was a world of order and precision, its staff moving with quiet efficiency, their voices low but kind. The air carried the faint tang of antiseptic, a familiar scent that grounded her. Emily walked the halls with the same care she'd always shown, her fingers brushing the corner of a hospital bed to straighten it, a small act that felt almost sacred. She paused to ask a nurse how her day was going, her eyes searching for the truth behind the polite, "Fine." She slipped an extra pack of crackers into the pocket of a tech who'd skipped lunch, a gesture so instinctive it felt like breathing. These were the habits of a woman who had always seen the people around her, who had always cared enough to act. But now her kindness carried the weight of her new role, the authority of head nurse, backed by the respect of a nation. She didn't need that power to move her, but she would use it to do more, to reach further, to lift others as she always had. Later that day, Emily sat alone in the break room, the soft hum of the facility muffled beyond the door. A notebook lay open before her pen moving with quiet intention as she wrote notes of encouragement. One for a young medic, his eyes shadowed with the weight of burnout, a reminder that his work mattered, that he was enough. Another for a janitor, his shoulders bowed with worry for his mother's recent diagnosis, a simple message of hope to carry him through. Each note was a small thread of connection, a quiet act of care woven into the fabric of their days. To Emily, these gestures weren't grand, they were essential. She wasn't a headline nor a hero in the way the world often painted them, with fanfare and fleeting applause. She was simply someone who showed up, who stepped forward when it mattered, who chose kindness when it would have been easier to turn away. Her heart, steady and vast, held no room for self-aggrandizement. Emily's strength lay in her quiet moments, the ones no one saw, the ones that didn't make the news. She thought of the patients she'd held hands with in the ER, their fears spilling out in the dark. She thought of the countless nights she'd stayed late, double-checking charts, not because she had to, but because she cared. Those moments had shaped her, and they were no different now, even in the gleaming halls of the White House. The badge on her chest might have changed, but her purpose hadn't. She was still Emily Daniels, the woman who gave without counting the cost, who listened without judgment, who believed that every small act of care could ripple outward, touching lives she'd never know.